welcome back to the Thousand Cranes Kitchen. I'm Dr. Chris, your host. The whole intention of the Thousand Cranes Kitchen was to help men with prostate cancer and their families cook up delicious meals. There's so many limitations in what we're allowed to eat, not allowed, but we're recommended that we eat and that we don't eat, things to eat, things to avoid. I thought today we'd spend the whole episode on the best foods to eat to protect our prostate, in some cases actually protect it to the point where it can affect the whether you get prostate cancer or not, and then which foods to avoid, and clarify that a little bit, because some of that is a little bit cloudy, and a lot of the things that I talk about, there's a lot of clouds involved in there. Sometimes there's no real clear answer. But why are we doing this even in general? Well, prostate cancer is now the most common cancer in men, and it's one of the top 2 or 3 leading causes of cancer death in the United States, and depends on whose data you read, but it's up there, and it's preventable. Like so many things that we talk about, it's preventable. And if you think about the statistics, 1 in every 8 men in this country will be diagnosed with prostate cancer at some point in their life. You think, well, that's a lot. Did you realize that is the exact same number of women who will be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime? So my point is that, everybody knows about the Pink Ribbon campaign, and God bless them. They've done a tremendous job with awareness and education. But do you even know what the color of the prostate cancer ribbon is? If you've got prostate cancer, maybe now you know. It's light blue. And not that that's really important, but the point is that everyone knows the pink ribbon. Everyone knows, even men know, that women should go in for what kind of test? A mammogram, right? But I talk to friends all the time because of, what we're dealing with here, and I bet you that 80% of them have never heard of a PSA test, the prostate specific antigen test. And that's a shame, because it's a very minimally invasive test. It's a blood draw. It's 1 tube. I recommend you do 1 tube once a year. I've been saying that for a long time now. 1 tube once a year. Let's talk about that a little bit. So 1 in 8 men in the US, but among men of African descent, that goes up to 1 in 6. And if you're from the Caribbean, it's even higher than that. And unfortunately, African American men are twice as likely to die from this disease as everyone else. So there's a lot of negatives here. I think it was the CDC, they estimate that there's going to be 300,000 new prostate cancer diagnoses in this year. Well, 300,000, that sounds like a lot, but don't we have a lot? We have millions and millions of people. That's 821, something like that. 821 men every single day will hear from their doctor, "Sir, you have prostate cancer." Can you imagine? 821 people. That's a lot of people. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I set up the Thousand Cranes Project. And because of my passion for cooking, I thought that I could help by setting up the Thousand Cranes Kitchen. Okay. Anyway, let's start with foods that are bad, and then we'll move on to the good news. So the first thing that you want to avoid almost at all costs is sugar. And this is not just a prostate cancer thing. Anybody with cancer should try to avoid sugar like the plague. There's so much sugar in so many of the foods that we eat, it's really, really hard to avoid it. A little bit here, a little bit there, okay, but really ideally try to eliminate your sugar. And then even if you try to find a healthy sugar substitute, like for years I was using honey, thinking, well, this is great. And there are some very beneficial reasons to use honey instead of white sugar. The thing is that your body interprets honey in the same way that it interprets white sugar. It metabolizes it the same way, it stores it in the same places. So even though it does have some beneficial characteristics, try to avoid sugar if you can. Now, one that's a little bit confusing is dairy. And I actually, you know what I wanted to do? I took out some, or I printed out some papers, because I wanted you to know that somebody was asking me, like, you spout off all this knowledge. How do you know what's right and what's not? So I'm a member of a research honor society called Sigma Xi, and there are very specific tenets that we need to follow when we're looking up research. And there's a pyramid. Just like there's a food pyramid, there's a research pyramid. And at the bottom of the pyramid are things like observation and case studies. Now, what's a case study? If somebody comes into my practice and I see something that's unusual, something that's not the norm of what we see, I may document it, and then I'll write a paper and it'll get published. That's the lowest form because it's one case on a single patient. However, as you go higher and higher into this pyramid, the very top are something called systematic reviews. Systematic reviews take a whole bunch of papers. So you might start with 500 papers, something like that. Sometimes you start with 1,000 papers. And then do you evaluate 1,000 papers? Absolutely not. You put in certain criteria to eliminate the papers that don't deal with the population that you're looking at, or don't deal with the types of food that you're looking at. So that's the type of papers that have the strongest evidence, I guess. So I found a couple here that I just wanted to kind of go over with you regarding milk, because I've told you in the past that yogurt's okay. Well, yogurt is dairy, and you know what's going on here. Yogurt is a fermented dairy, and it acts as it's very beneficial to your gut bacteria. It's called your microbiome, but your gut bacteria appreciates fermented foods like sauerkraut and kimchi, pickles. And so, first paper here, it's from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Now the thing is, you know what? There's a lot of junk journals now, and this is a whole other, probably I could have a whole other podcast or video on just this topic, but there's a lot of journals popping up that charge researchers to publish, because a lot of researchers are under a lot of pressure to publish. And you may have heard of very prominent people, heads of departments at very well-known universities, actually discounting or eliminating or removing papers that they had previously published because they're not really accurate, they're not true, they're not their own work. So in this particular journal, which is peer-reviewed, what they did was they studied calcium and dairy in a population in North Carolina and Louisiana. It's the North Carolina-Louisiana Prostate Cancer Project. And they sent a questionnaire to about 1,000 African American men and about 1,000 European American men. And what they were trying to find out is how much milk they were drinking, and then their risk or whether they have prostate cancer. And they found that there was a very positive association between dairy and prostate cancer, and it was ultra high in men of African descent. And then men who reported the highest daily consumption of whole fat milk had a 74% increased odds of having aggressive prostate cancer. So if you're drinking milk, stop drinking milk. Then the question came up, well, what's the difference between whole milk and low-fat milk and skim milk? You know, is there a difference? And there was another study here, I'm not going to go into it, but it's a systematic review. It's from the World Journal of Men's Health. And in the end, their conclusions of I think this was like 257 studies. They got it down to like the top 20. There was overwhelming majority of the studies included in this systematic review were suggestive of a link between milk consumption and increased risk of developing prostate cancer. However, they really couldn't get a clear answer on whether there's a benefit to using low-fat milk or skim milk. So my advice to you, if you have your coffee, have your cup or two of coffee a day, use something other than cow's milk. Use one of the plant-based alternatives, and you'll be doing yourself a favor. Okay, no sugar. Limit your whole milk. Red meat. Unfortunately, red meat's on the list, and it's because it increases inflammation. And we'll have a whole episode on inflammation coming up. But in general, a little bit of red meat is okay. And the overarching thought here is that just everything in moderation. You can have a little bit of sugar, you can have a little bit of red meat, just don't have red meat every single day. Don't have big gobs of sugar in your coffee. And then we get to the really bad one, which is ultra-processed food, but in particular, ultra-processed meat. Now, what's ultra-processed meat? Basically, if you're opening a plastic wrapper and eating a sausage out of it, that's ultra-processed meat. Unfortunately, bacon, usually mass-produced bacon, falls into that. Breakfast sausages fall into this group. Even bologna and hot dogs and beef jerky, all those things where they add a lot of chemicals. Basically, if you are eating a food and it has 5 or more ingredients in them, in those foods, and you don't have those ingredients in your kitchen, chances are it's an ultra-processed food. Now, the thing is, with ultra-processed meat, I didn't know this before I did my studies. Ultra-processed meat is in the same category of cancerous foods and materials as smoking and asbestos. And you're thinking, what? That little sausage that I eat, or I ate that package of beef jerky, that's as cancerous as as working in an asbestos mine or smoking cigarettes. That's not when they do the levels. It has more to do with the strength of the evidence behind it. So the papers behind ultra-processed meat show just as strong evidence that they cause cancer as the strength of the papers behind smoking. Nobody at this point, I don't think, questions that if you smoke a lot, you might get lung cancer or some other cancer. If you inhale a lot of asbestos, and we do a lot of environmental protection to keep us from airborne asbestos. There's not a lot of people who question that because the evidence is so strong. The evidence against ultra-processed meat is just as strong as that. So as much as possible, try to stay away from those. If you process your own hogs, you and your buddy split a hog and you go and have it processed and you know what ingredients are in there, by all means. But if not, and you're buying something that has pretty long shelf life, that's another indication. If you look at the expiration date, or it has a best by, used by such and such a date, and that date is weeks into the future, whereas if you know that if you had some fresh meat, it would not last weeks into the future. Think about buying some fish. You buy the fish, you put it in your fridge. 2 weeks later, nobody's going to want to go anywhere near that fish. But if you have an ultra-processed source, then it might be good for months. And so keep that in mind, because this is a really big one that I don't think a lot of people are spending a lot of time on. So this is not even specifically for prostate cancer. This is just overall general health. There was actually, I'll finish one more thing. There was a study in Europe of 325,000 men and women, and then they put them into tiers of how much ultra-processed food they ate. And this is not specific to meat, but ultra-processed foods, crackers and cereal and packaged, anything that's in a package, not everything, but that has 5 or more ingredients, ultra-processed. So the people who ate the most of this stuff had 25% more risk or more chance of having a heart attack, a stroke, an angina. So try to limit your prepackaged foods. They're very convenient. I'm not saying don't have them ever again, but think twice about having them often. Okay, that's all the bad stuff. Now let's get to some of the good stuff. Cruciferous vegetables. Now, what are cruciferous vegetables? Those are the ones that stink. Right? It's broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage and kale and collard greens. They have that little bit of a weird sulfur smell. Turns out that they're really, really good for us. Even bok choy and radishes. Radishes have that little bit of smell too, right? Those are all cruciferous vegetables, and they have it's called a phytonutrient, which phyto is plant, so it's a nutrient that comes from plants. We talked about polyphenols that come from plants. This one has one called glucoraphanin, which, well, they used to say that and a nickel will get you a cup of coffee. So that and $5 will get you a cup of coffee. Cruciferous vegetables, we'll have one episode just on cruciferous recipes so that we can discuss some delicious ways to prepare these foods, because you don't just have to stick them in a pot and boil it and then the whole house stinks and nobody wants to eat it. Second is berries. The best berries for us, because of all of the phenolic compounds, the polyphenols: strawberries, blackberries, blueberries, and raspberries. Those are the 4 top. They have the most antioxidants, the best benefit to us. In general, I think I mentioned this one time before, try to go for, if you have a choice of a yellow fruit and a red fruit, take the red fruit, if it's the same. And by that I'm meaning that if you have a choice of a raspberry and a blackberry, and sometimes raspberries are red, sometimes they're golden, go for the blackberry. It's got more nutrients in it. A good example of this is bell peppers. Okay, so you can go to the store and you buy the package. It's got the yellow one, the green one, the red one, there's orange ones. Which one is the best? From perspective of vitamin C, if you think about the pepper, when it first grows on the plant, it's green, right? So even though that's darker than maybe orange or yellow or red, the more it ripens, it turns yellow, then it'll turn orange, and eventually, if you leave it on there long enough, and the groundhogs, I'm pointing outside because we have groundhogs, and the groundhogs don't eat it, it's going to turn red. And actually, the red bell peppers have the most vitamin C of all of them. So from a nutrition standpoint, try to always pick the dark green versus, pick some kind of dark green dandelion versus iceberg lettuce. Something that's really dark is going to have a lot more phytonutrients, a lot more plant nutrients for you. Fish. I'm going to talk a lot about omega-3s when we start talking about fats. But the cold water fish, salmon, and then they're usually oily. The salmon, trout, herring, sardines, even bluefish. A lot of people don't like bluefish. If you make it the right way, maybe we'll have a bluefish episode. But those omega-3s, why they're so important, they're really, really important for brain development. So it's really important for babies when they're growing. And I don't know too many parents who are feeding their babies sardines and herring, but the omega-3s are really important. And they're also important because we don't produce them in our own body. We don't produce them in our own bodies on our own. So we need to get them from some other source. The thing is, maybe I'll save a secret for a future episode. Green tea, really nutritious. And we talked about catechins in green tea. The thing is, there are catechins in black tea as well, but think about tea leaves are green, right? So green tea is not processed. Once you start to process it and it turns black, there are fewer polyphenols in a black tea versus a green tea. There's still polyphenols and antioxidants in there, but green tea is healthier. And so if you get down to, well, I really don't like green tea, I've got green tea here. I drink it all day long because there are studies that show us that 6 or 7 cups, and this is way bigger than a cup, we're just talking about the little cups, of green tea a day actually can show a decrease in the risk for prostate cancer. And the same thing happens with 1 to 2 cups of coffee every day, decrease the risk of prostate cancer because of the catechins that are in there. A word I don't like, legumes. I'd rather say beans and peas and peanuts and lentils, all really good. But a lot of people don't eat lentils because they don't know how to cook them. Maybe we'll probably have an episode with like maybe 3 or 4 ways to prepare lentils because they are very, very nutritious and real good for you. I mean, I love peanuts, so I eat them all the time. Great source of vitamin E as well. And then the ultimate, the best food that you can eat for prostate health to keep yourself healthy are tomatoes. And when you start thinking about the cultures that have the longest life, the best longevity, you hear about the Mediterranean diet, olive oil and fish and fresh nuts, and you think about Italy and Greece, tomatoes. They have tomatoes as much as Japanese people, I'm half Japanese, have rice. But you look at the Japanese people with the high longevity, and they're not eating a lot of olive oil, and they're not eating a lot of tomatoes, now more than they used to, but they never ate olive oil and tomatoes. So what's in their diet? Well, their diet consists of some other things that are very, very nutritious that they also extends their lifetime. It keeps them healthy. And I do intend to have a comparison of these different parts of the world, the types of diets that they're eating, and I think you'll find it really interesting. But anyway, tomatoes. Why are tomatoes so healthy for us? Well, there's something called lycopene, and lycopene has a color. And so it is a carotenoid. Remember the carotenoid, the carrots, and good for your eyes? Well, they're good for a whole bunch of other things too. They're good for heart health and there's a whole list of things that lycopene is good for. But you know what it's really, really good for is prostate health. It actually will help cause the death. It's called apoptosis. It's the naturally programmed cell death. In all cells have it, and when we exfoliate cells, apoptosis, it increases apoptosis in cancer cells, in prostate cancer cells. Sorry, my dog is shedding. Okay, lycopene. Okay, so the thing is with lycopene, Cornell University did a study, and we know that there's vitamin C in tomatoes, right? And now we know that there's lycopene in tomatoes. What they did was they heated up tomatoes. They cooked tomatoes. They didn't heat them up. They cooked them. And they checked for the levels of vitamin C and lycopene over the course of like 30 minutes. And what they found was, as you might imagine, vitamin C, the level after 2 minutes decreased. After 30 minutes, it decreased by like 30%. But lycopene, the amount of lycopene that was bioavailable, that was in the tomatoes, actually increased. After 30 minutes, it went up 164%. Can you imagine? So what that tells us is that cooked tomatoes are healthier for our prostate than raw tomatoes. Raw tomatoes are good, but cooked tomatoes are better. For vitamin C is so fragile that if you take a tomato and you slice it up and you chop it up and you dice it up and you put it in your Cuisinart, it actually has less vitamin C from beating the heck out of it. But again, heat. The other thing that's really cool about this is that if you cook the tomatoes in olive oil, it actually increases the bioavailability of the lycopene in our bodies. Now think about, again, the Mediterranean diet, olive oil and tomatoes. Who's eating that? A lot in those areas of Europe. So finally, lycopene. It is the number one strongest antioxidant of anything that we have and the most helpful for any prostate health. It's actually 10 times more, it's 10 times stronger antioxidant effect than even vitamin E. So it is tremendous. And behind me, you see some ingredients. I was going to whip up a quick sauce, but this is, I've been going on a little bit longer than I anticipated. So I'm going to end our session for right now. And then I'm going to get set up and we're going to have a little session of making a really quick, delicious tomato sauce that's high in lycopene, and lycopene being 10 times stronger than vitamin E, the strongest antioxidant and best for our prostate health. So thanks again for joining me. Be a blessing. Be a blessing. I know you're a blessing. You're a blessing to me. So have a great day, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you.